Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and we are specifically going to talk about the 44 Dungeon Master, the most important Dungeon Master of 2024. Okay, so what are we talking about here? The 44 rules of Dungeons & Dragons. So what are the 44 rules of Dungeons & Dragons? They are a distraught communication sent from one distraught dungeon master to a almost inarguably terrible group of dragon masters. Probably some of the worst dragon masters that are playing Dungeons & Dragons today. So, why is this so important? So, first of all, this blew up on Twitter, and then it blew up on YouTube. And a lot of people covered this. Okay, Harmony Ginger covered this. A lot of YouTubers covered this. Harmony Ginger covered this. Professor Dungeon Master covered this. XP to Level 3 covered this. And there was one more in there. Oh, and Bob World Builder covered this, right? And two of those are 100K subs, right? And actually, Professor Dungeon Master, Bob World Builder. Yeah, there were quite a few. Harmony Ginger was in there. Yeah, it was a lot. There were a lot of major YouTubers who covered this, and so, they got in and they discussed the 44 rules of Dungeons and Dragons. And I think what's really important to understand here is the 44 Dungeon Master. So that's another thing. To my knowledge, we don't know the identity of the 44 Dungeon Master, and that's good, because I think a lot of people didn't understand what he was saying. I do believe it was a male Dungeon Master. If anybody thinks there's evidence that it wasn't a male Dungeon Master, please let me know in the comments. And so I am assuming he was male. You can come at me if you think there's evidence that it was a she. I'm not sure it even helps the female gender for us to attach the 44 Dungeon Master to them. But I think the 44 Dungeon Master, so I'm saying the Dungeon Master who wrote those 44 rules of Dungeons & Dragons, they are the 44 Dungeon Master. They emerged in 2024. And when they emerged in 2024, they emerged as the most important Dungeon Master of 2024. And you're like, wait a second, Scott. Isn't Matthew Mercer the most important Dungeon Master of 2024? Matthew Mercer is absolutely the most famous Dungeon Master of 2024. But this is a wane year, right? You wax or you wane. This is a huge wane year for Critical Role. Critical Role has taken it in the teeth for the terrible Candela Obscura. That campaign has abominably failed, right? And there was a lot on the line. There were a lot of people who literally thought Critical Role could compete with Dungeons & Dragons with Candela Obscura. That became ludicrously laughable after just a few of the of the APs, the actual plays, right? And then also, Bell's Hells is terrible. It's not making anyone happy. No one likes it. The views are down, the momentum is down, and while Matthew Mercer is very important in that, Jeff Bezos is still very, very important. He's like, oh, season 3 of Vox Machina, fantastic. We're going to squeeze out 3 seasons of Mighty Nine. But frankly, I think we all want to skip Bell's Hells. Nobody wants that garbage on Amazon. So Critical Role is under the gun to actually do something. So the reality is, this is a wane year for Matthew Mercer, right? And let's be clear, it's Matthew Mercer. Nobody cares about Critical Role. There's not a single person on Critical Role that couldn't be replaced tomorrow, and Critical Role would be fine. You replace Matthew Mercer, Critical Role turns to dust like a vampire in the sun, right? Critical Role is Matthew Mercer, right? So when I say Critical Role, I'm saying Critical Role, Matthew Mercer, and whoever he chooses to be there. Right now, he's being nice and keeping all his friends. He'd get rid of every single one of them, and Critical Role would probably be stronger, right, in my humble opinion. But let's talk about the 44 Dungeon Master. So the 44 Dungeon Master emerges as the most important Dungeon Master of 2024. And the reason why is people are talking less about Matthew Mercer because he's on the way down. He's not on the way up, right? In many ways. And he could absolutely scramble to the top and get some real energy in 2025. But he has to make sacrifices. and he has proven he is not good at doing the hard thing. Spencer Stark totally failed on Candela Obscura. He's still working right now on Daggerheart that has real stakes on it. Should have been fired, in my humble opinion. Like, actually, not fired, right? No. Don't fire Spencer Stark, right? Spencer Stark is now going to edit. He's literally going to like edit the product, right? Like, just do a role playing game edit, right? Like, oh, there's an A that should be an E. Thank you, right? And replace him as lead design. Don't fire him. Just move him to a new non-consequential position, right? And there's no need to embarrass him. I get it, right? He tried his best on Candela Obscura, but he failed utterly, and he absolutely should be removed as the lead designer on Daggerheart. And the fact that he won't do it is why Matthew Mercer is not the most important dungeon master of 2024, but the 44 dungeon master is. Why? Well, I'll say it. I think that the 44 dungeon master is the first blue-collar dungeon master, right? And it is the idea of terrible dungeon master, terrible dragon master, Dungeons and Dragons is being done, right? And this is critically important to understand. The 44 dungeon master says, listen, there's a ton of bad Dungeons and Dragons being played. That's not the case on OSR and on Indie, right? There's not a ton of bad OSR and Indie being played. You know why? Because those OSR and Indie tables, when they reach a bad dungeon master, a bad game master, or they reach a bad player, they simply get rid of them. They give this advice in every single one of their commentaries, right? They're like, oh, you got the wrong people at the table. Dungeons and Dragons is like, there are no wrong people at the table. There are no wrong people. There are no wrong dungeon masters. There are no wrong people to be a dungeon master. There are no wrong people to be, we will take the worst. We'll take the worst. You're wretched, you're haggard. We'll take them. You know why? Because we actually improve them. We don't shunt them away and ignore them. We will make them learn, grow, improve, and transform, which is exactly what Gary Gygax built Dungeons and Dragons to do. We'll take your worst. And it's a really big deal. It's a really big deal, right? So, and the 44 Dungeon Master proves this. He's the receipt that a ton of bad Dungeons and Dragons is happening. And this is why the OSR and the Indie are not growing, because they're seeking these terribly elite tables, and they cull people in order to make sure that only almond milk, hummus eating, electric car, driving, perfect elite play their games, right? Like, and if you're not up to snuff, they have no interest in helping you as a person. They have an interest in putting you over there. Hey, go play a Skyrim, play a video game. Nobody wants you at this table. Shoo off. We're only looking for perfect people here. But Dungeons and Dragons, the 44 Dungeon Master proves that there's hundreds of thousands of these tables, right? Of bad Dungeon Masters and bad Dragon Masters. And Dungeons and Dragons is here for it. They're ready to fix people, in my humble opinion. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. And the important part is when I get to your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.